Munich applauded. Budapest mattered. That is the story. At the Munich Security Conference, Marco Rubio stood before Europe's political class and spoke of history, kinship, civilization. He reminded the audience that America is a child of Europe. He spoke of intertwined destinies and an old friendship worth revitalizing. After months of tension, after tariffs, after the Greenland crisis, after the blunt rhetoric of the Trump administration's first year, the room relaxed. He received applause. For a brief moment, it felt like reassurance. Then he boarded a plane and flew east. Within hours, Rubio was standing beside Viktor Orbán in Budapest and meeting Fico in Bratislava. Two leaders frequently criticized in Brussels. Two governments at odds with much of the European Union on migration, rule of law disputes, and the pace and scale of support for Ukraine. Two capitals that represent a different political current inside Europe. That flight may prove more consequential than the speech, because what happened was not a diplomatic routine. It was a political signal. The United States is not withdrawing from Europe. It is redefining which Europe it sees as aligned. Rubio's Munich speech was careful. It was disciplined. Unlike last year's blunt criticism from Vice President J.D. Vance, this was not a cultural broadside. It was a conditional embrace. America prefers partnership. America does not seek separation. America wants a strong Europe, but embedded in that warmth was a clear warning. Europe must assume primary responsibility for its own conventional defense. Europe must align on values. Europe must reform. This language fits squarely within a broader strategic doctrine that is now shaping Washington's approach. Under the banner of burden shifting, the United States is repositioning itself. The Indo-Pacific is the priority. Europe remains important, but no longer central. American troops will not necessarily disappear overnight, but the psychological architecture of the alliance is changing. Europe is being told to prepare for a future in which it carries the weight. That alone would be a major shift, but Rubio's itinerary added another layer. If this were purely about defense spending, he could have flown from Munich to Berlin, or Paris, or Brussels. Instead, he chose Hungary and Slovakia. This matters because politics now intersects with strategy. Hungary under Orbán has long described its model as sovereign and illiberal. Slovakia under Fico has questioned sanctions policy and pushed back against Brussels on multiple fronts. Because these governments speak a language that resonates with parts of the American right. National sovereignty over supranational governance, skepticism toward migration, resistance to what they see as progressive overreach. By elevating these capitals immediately after reassuring Munich, Washington demonstrated that ideological affinity is no longer separate from alliance management. It is becoming part of it. For decades, American leadership in Europe rested on institutional continuity. NATO's command structures, EU coordination, shared assumptions about liberal democracy. Disagreements occurred, but the center held. Alignment was measured in treaty obligations and defense spending commitments. Now alignment is being reinterpreted through a political lens. The Trump administration's rhetoric increasingly blends civilizational language with strategic repositioning. Christian heritage, sovereignty, cultural cohesion. Rubio spoke of reviving an old friendship, but also of rejecting what he described as managed decline. The implication was that the alliance must be revitalized in a particular direction. That direction looks different depending on which European capital you stand in. In Berlin and Brussels, there is deep concern that the United States is becoming transactional, selective, and unpredictable. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has warned of a widening divide. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has spoken of lines crossed that cannot be uncrossed. European policymakers privately describe a sense of shock therapy. At the same time, in Budapest, the tone is different. There is affirmation, there is warmth, there is visible affinity. This creates a new internal dynamic inside Europe itself. When Washington engages Europe as factions rather than as a bloc, it strengthens some governments over others. It amplifies existing fractures between integrationist leaders and sovereignty-focused leaders. It turns internal EU debates into geopolitical fault lines. The United States may not intend to fragment Europe, but selective engagement inevitably shapes political balance. Behind this political symbolism lies a deeper structural debate about NATO's future. Some strategists in Washington have advocated a more dormant alliance model. In that vision, Europe commands its own conventional forces. The United States maintains a nuclear umbrella and limited forward presence. NATO expansion stops. The alliance becomes finite and more regionally self-reliant. Supporters argue this is overdue. Europe is wealthy and technologically capable. It can defend itself. The United States must pivot resources toward China. Critics worry that dormancy becomes disengagement, and disengagement becomes doubt. They argue that alliance credibility is not only about nuclear guarantees, but about visible presence and unquestioned commitment. Regardless of which side one takes, the political overlay now complicates the shift. If Europe is being asked to shoulder more responsibility while simultaneously watching Washington elevate leaders who challenge Brussels from within, trust becomes more fragile. Democratic politicians who traveled to Munich attempted to reassure European counterparts that American politics can swing back. They argued that the transatlantic bond can be repaired. Yet even sympathetic European officials increasingly ask whether trust can be restored so easily. If US strategy reorients this dramatically in one administration, defense planning across Europe must adjust accordingly. That adjustment is not easily reversed. The applause in Munich reflected relief that Washington did not slam the door. The meetings in Budapest reflected preference. The Atlantic Alliance is not collapsing. NATO still functions. American forces remain on the continent. Intelligence cooperation continues. But something subtle and profound is shifting. The United States is no longer treating Europe as a unified strategic space. It is treating it as a political landscape with camps. In that landscape, Washington is signaling which governments it sees as natural partners in a new era defined by sovereignty, strategic competition, and civilizational framing. From Munich to Budapest, the message was not abandonment. It was selection. The deeper question now is not whether America will defend Europe. The question is how Europe will respond to an America that engages it unevenly. Will Europe integrate more tightly to counterbalance external pressure, or will it fragment further under the weight of ideological realignment? The flight east after Munich was short. The consequences may not be. And for Americans watching this unfold, the strategic gamble is clear. Choosing friends based on ideological kinship may feel clarifying in the short term, but alliances built over generation are delicate structures. When loyalty becomes conditional and affinity becomes selective, the map of the Atlantic world begins to redraw itself. Munich applauded. Budapest mattered. At Western relations, we follow the shifts beneath the speeches, the strategy behind the symbolism, and the power realignments shaping the future of the Atlantic world. If you value serious geopolitical analysis without the noise, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and join the conversation. The transatlantic order is changing in real time, and we'll be here tracking every move. Thank you very much for watching.